My first wow moment job was when I got a part-time gig at Pinterest in 2016 in San Francisco. I had just moved there on a scholarship, and I want to tell you about how I got that scholarship and why I moved there. My parents got divorced in January of 2015, and it was like a complete shock to my system. I didn't see it coming, even though they were an absolute mismatch and they stayed together for far too long, and we constantly said, you guys should probably break up, and they didn't. Anyway, I digress. My parents got divorced 2015. A scholarship opportunity came my way in late 2015. My professor at the time was brilliant, and she said to me, don't apply for any of the most popular companies. There was BMW North America, there was Saatchi & Saatchi, there was all sorts of different companies that were like, oh my God, this could be the best thing for my CV. This is a status game thing, right? If we're going along with the theme of status games. And if you haven't watched my other 2 videos talking about status games, maybe go and watch those first before you watch this one. So I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to apply for this company called Rogen SI. Never heard of them in my life. They're headquartered out in New York, satellite office in San Francisco, sales consulting firm from what I could tell. I put my application through, and then a few days later I had an interview with the manager of the satellite office. She was a Kiwi. We got on like a house on fire, and I got it. The guy that was kind of running the program, the scholarship program, was a bit of a dick, and he said to me, you don't even seem very serious about this. Like, do you even want this? And I wanted to say to him, look, asshole, my parents just got divorced. I'm going through a lot right now. Like, I don't need your shit too. I ended up quitting my job at Coca-Cola, which was my first post-uni job. I ended up getting on a plane and moving to San Francisco when I was 22 or 23. I didn't know anybody. I got a Airbnb on the outskirts of 38th and Geary, for anyone that knows San Francisco. And it was like this underground dungeony house with these people that lived there. I had a small stipend from uni, and this tiny stipend was enough to probably last like 2 months living in San Francisco. This scholarship wasn't paid. It was just like a work experience opportunity. So I get to San Francisco, and I'm like on the bus, and I'm kind of cruising around, and I'm looking at things, and I'm going, damn, this is cool. Like, look at this building. I'm up on like this 52nd floor, like in the financial district. Before I know it, this company's kind of going into liquidation. Like, everyone's a bit stressed and vulnerable about keeping their jobs. And then I'm just this unpaid intern that's coming for work experience, but no one really has any work to give me. And I'm just going to work each day looking for apartments to live on Craigslist, and everything's so expensive. And I'm going to these listings, and there's like curtains dividing rooms with like 8 people living in these houses. And I was like, how the fuck am I ever going to find anything? Eventually, I found a place in Noe Valley, which was really cool. Found it on Craigslist. The biggest thing that I learned from this is like, you have to take one messy action at a time without knowing what the next steps will be. Like, they keep getting presented to you. A brilliant book that changed my life a couple of years after this was The Alchemist. And The Alchemist talks about following the omens. I found a Kiwi recruiter on a Kiwi Aussie Facebook group. And she was like, hey, we're looking for people to work at Pinterest for 20 hours a week. You're basically going to be screening pins and helping formulate policies and frameworks for the security team, partnerships team around like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable to go on Pinterest. And all I saw was Pinterest, and I'm like, holy shit, imagine if I could work at Pinterest. And I had an interview and I got the job. But I still had this shit internship that I didn't want to do with these people that sucked, and everyone was uninspired, and it was a really average environment. And I was like, I don't want to work here. And so I contacted my uni, and I was like, hey, this is what's happening. This is the opportunity that's come my way. Can I take it? And they were basically like, well, as long as we can follow your journey and you can do some interviews for the university to be able to be publicized, like, yes, you can take it. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I ended up quitting that unpaid internship. I was able to keep the stipend they gave me, and I got to work at Pinterest 20 hours a week. And at this point, I was going through money like crazy. And so I was a straight up hustler. Like, I would get on the bus for free. I would like walk everywhere. I would take food from Pinterest home because I was only getting 20 hours a week, being paid like $20 or $25 an hour. So I'd like eat protein bars for dinner, and I'd eat like a huge lunch. And sometimes we had to work remotely and we weren't even in the office. So on those days, I'd just be like praying that I'd get enough money the next week in order to keep being able to live in San Francisco. I started scouting Sitter City and Care.com, and I had never been a babysitter in my life. Like, I didn't know anything about babysitting, but I was like, man, maybe I could babysit rich people's kids and they could maybe pay me cash. And then that would be enough to boost my income with my 20 hours a week at Pinterest. I was like, okay, cool. Well, then I wouldn't have to leave and I'd be able to just stick around and keep doing what I'm doing. So I ended up interviewing with this guy who was a complete dick, but that's another story. And he had a reasonable exit because the company got acquired. So he was about to go out on his own and start his own venture. And he was building out what was it? It's like if you were having a 30th birthday or a 60th birthday or an engagement or a wedding, each person would write a letter to you and it would be compiled into a book. And that book would then be gifted to you on the celebratory moment where all the people would have put all their nice, beautiful words in the book. So it was a very cool idea, and I could really get behind that. But as I said, the guy was a dick, and I was also arrogant and like in survival mode, so I didn't really adhere to rules, hence why I'm a swan and an entrepreneur, and I cannot work for other people and do things for other people. He paid me $25 an hour cash, and I worked for him 10, 15 hours a week, sometimes more. And it was initially that I was going to look after his daughter and like run some errands and be a bit of an assistant for him. But then he was like, oh, actually, I want you to help me build this business. Long story short, that didn't last very long, but it helped me with my financial woes at the time. I took messy action toward that. And then what happened was I quit that because it wasn't working, and I was like, this guy is just not for me, and he's coming down on me hot, and he's getting me to do all these things I don't like doing, and this just doesn't feel good for me. So I quit without knowing what would be next. Then within a few weeks, I got the opportunity to go to Dropbox. And Dropbox was a full-time gig, really good pay. The work wasn't the most exciting either. I was 23, right at the bottom of the food chain, but I didn't care. And what I found really interesting is the folks that I worked with at Pinterest were like, oh, we're so jealous. The food and the amenities and everything is so much better at Dropbox. I went to 46 Craigslist viewings because I didn't want to live in Noe Valley anymore. I wanted to live in the Marina, Cow Hollow. It took me 46 viewings to find a place that I actually wanted to live and I could afford, that wasn't like extortionately expensive. So I moved into that place, and during that time where I had quit that gig and I had only got the 20 hours a week at Pinterest, I was wrapped in a shame blanket of embarrassment because I didn't think I had enough money to be able to stay in this place that I had just moved into. And these guys were my friends, or becoming my friends, as they were my roommates. And I was very like, oh my God, like I might have to leave. This might all fall apart. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because we default into wrapping a shame blanket around ourselves, or like a not enoughness blanket around ourselves, especially if we are hanging out with people that we perceive are better than us, or have more money than us, or more status than us, or are smarter than us, or have a better job than us, or whatever it is. And I felt that at the time. You know, I'm living with these guys that are all really successful. They're a bit older than me as well. They're like 25, 26, 27. and they were all American and I wasn't, and I was on a visa, and I was like, damn, this is all just so intense. I created this story in my head that like I'm not enough and that I have only got 20 hours a week at Pinterest, and what if I never find another job? Of course I got another job. I got another job in an instant at Dropbox, but what I'm trying to say here is I felt too ashamed to tell them that I was only working 20 hours a week. So when I wasn't going to work at Pinterest, like when I was either working at home or whatever, I would just leave the house anyway because I didn't want them to know that I wasn't working full time, because I was so afraid that after going to 46 Craigslist viewings, I wouldn't be able to keep the house. Like I wouldn't be able to stay there. And it was like my dreams were all kind of coming true that I didn't even know were my dreams when I was living in New Zealand before I got the scholarship. When things get really good, we get so afraid that they're going to be taken away from us that we end up playing those status games, and we end up freaking out that we don't belong and that we are an imposter and it's going to be pulled from underneath us. This happens at every level. The saying, new level, same devil, it's true, and we have to navigate it every single time. The reason I'm telling you this story is because it doesn't matter. You are who you are, and my number one lesson in that was acceptance, like accepting where I was at, knowing that I wanted to shift it, but just knowing that it wasn't actually a big deal and I didn't need to shame myself. And if we look at the vibrational scale of consciousness, I'm going to be putting this up a lot because it is the best reference point. Shame lives in the contracted space, and shame is the worst place that we can live if we want to take messy action. If we want to move forward, if we want to build wealth, we want to improve our health, we want to improve our relationships, shame shuts us down into isolation and I am separate from, I am different than. We need to do all that we can to move out of our shame and to move into truth. And that is why I'm so obsessed with building a community of like-minded swans, entrepreneurial women that first and foremost have freedom as their number one motivator, and number two is connection. That is why we need to come together, so then we don't fall into these shame cycles. We don't fall into these self-imposed isolating prisons because we don't feel enough or that we're not enough, because none of that is true, especially as women. I hope this video was useful. It's a bit of a story about my 2016, kind of 2015 life, a long time ago now. But just know, new level, same devil. Don't bother with the status games. Seek support from people that you know understand you. And if you don't know anyone that understands you or gets you, take to your journal. Be the parent that you needed and the supportive figure you needed growing up in your journal, and watch you reparent and repattern yourself. It is the best manifesting for getting what you want.